Okay, welcome everyone. Just give us a minute to connect to Facebook Live and then we'll get started. And do note that this session is being recorded. All right, if people are joining us, we're almost ready to get started, folks. Just hold on, we're connecting to Facebook Live and then we're going to get started. All right, we've got lots of folks joining. I can see the participants logging in. We're just finalizing our connection to Facebook Live. We'll get started in just a second. It's preparing to live stream. We're almost ready. Just hang in there with us. All right, we've gotten the go ahead. So Councilmember Craig Rice will share opening remarks. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. I know, and I speak as a parent. For those of you who are on the line who are parents, I have an 18-year-old who is a freshman in college, and we know what's happening. We've seen it via some of the recent reports. I think it was the CDC that reported that 1/4 of students aged 18 to 24 have reported substance abuse, to have to help deal with the mental anxiety and stress that they're under. Another 1/4 actually considered suicide. This is a real problem. And for us as parents, for us as leaders, for us as professionals, for us as people who care in our community, we want to try and do everything we can to provide the supports that are necessary for our young adults and to help them to be able to navigate these very difficult, incredibly challenging times. And it's very interesting because I want us to just take a step back and think about things that have faced us before. Yes, we may have faced health challenges, even those that have risen to the level of global pandemic. Yes, there have been times where we faced racial unrest and uncertainty. Yes, there were times where we had fiscal challenges and uncertainty that existed in terms of recessions. But we haven't had a time in which they're all happening together. And this has made a crushing blow, especially on our young adults aged 18 to 24, because so many of us see them as resilient as young adults who don't need the same supports that maybe our K through 12 cohorts do. The reality is that they actually are suffering some of the most heavy pressures out of all of our age groups of young people. And so we need to do more. And so tonight, we are lucky to have some students that will be able to share their student perspective. We have some professionals that will be able to share their professional perspective. And then there will be, I know, a chance for us to just talk and be able to understand and listen and learn about what it is that we need to do. Because we know at the end of the day, it's a caring mind, it's a caring heart. It's us making sure that we can help one another to get through these difficult times. That is the only way that we're going to make sure that our young people feel supported, that they feel nurtured, that they feel safe, and that they're able to get over these challenging times that we find ourselves in. The light is at the end of the tunnel, but the reality is that there's still more work to be done. And I look forward to learning more this evening to help myself and my wife and my family so that we can be more resilient and supportive of our daughter. And then also I look forward to the conversation so that all of us can learn of how we can do even more to help our young people. So with that, I turn it back over to you and really want to thank Every Mind for their great work in convening this. This is such an incredibly important topic that needs to happen now as we talk about recovery. Recovery can't happen without us making sure that we're built up and we're resilient and we have the tools that are necessary to get ourselves back on track. And that's what we hope to get tonight. So back to you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. I'm Kathy Hedge. I'm the Executive Director of the Parent Encouragement Program, also known as PEP. I'm really pleased to serve as your moderator for this evening's program because this is a topic that we at PEP work at every day, supporting and guiding parents in raising their children to be resilient and confident adults. I also have two boys myself who are young adults, ages 20 and 22, so I am very eager to hear and learn from our panelists tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about how this evening is going to work. I'll introduce the panel in brief, and then each panelist will tell you a little bit about themselves and their perspective on this topic. Then I'll ask the panel a few questions just to get us started, and then we'll take your questions because this is really an opportunity this evening for you to ask your questions and to hear from our panel and their unique perspectives. So please put your questions in the Q&A box, or if you're joining us from via Facebook, use the chat feature for your questions. And we have a team reviewing the questions that are coming in. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me just give you the full introduction of our panel. We have with us tonight Elizabeth Budin, who is a student at the University of Texas at Austin. We have Alicia Ching, the hotline specialist at EveryMind. We have Brian Cortez Flores, a graduate from Montgomery College, and we have Dr. Erica Merson, a licensed psychologist. So let's have each introduce themselves. We'll start with Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Budin, and as was stated by Kathy, I am a current student at the University of Texas at Austin. My situation is unfortunately not unique. I graduated from BCC High School in the spring of 2019, and I started college at the University of Texas, having a fantastic time in Austin, finally feeling like I was a young adult and able to do all the things that I had hoped to do as a student. And then the pandemic hit. And, you know, at first we were thinking this was not going to be as long as it did. And 1 year later, we are still feeling the effects of COVID-19 and of living life during uncertain times in a pandemic. So going from being a student in Austin to being back at home in Maryland has been quite the shock. And I think a lot of students have been feeling depression and anxiety, including myself. And I had the unfortunately not very unique position where I actually developed an eating disorder as a coping mechanism during the pandemic and as a way to try and get through the pandemic. So I'll definitely be able to answer questions regarding unique diagnoses as well as depression and anxiety. But I think I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're having tonight. So thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Alicia?
Hi, my name is Alicia Ching. I work at EveryMind on the hotline. I take calls, texts, and chats. I've been there since 2019, and what Elizabeth has already said, we've had a lot of people, young people, actually of all ages, but especially in this demographic of young and emerging adults that have been really just impacted by this isolation and all of the stressors that have been happening. So I'm looking forward to adding this particular perspective to the talk tonight, and I'm really happy to be here to be part of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. Brian?
Hello, guys. My name is Brian Cortez Flores. I am a student graduate from Montgomery College, graduating this year in the spring 2021. I started MC Montgomery College around 2017, so I was able to enjoy half of the years before COVID happened. And once COVID happened, it was just a shock with all of us. This is all unexpected. I didn't expect either for it to happen to me. Staying at home, concentrating on the screen for 6 hours a day. And it was really tough, not for me, but for all of my college classmates. Like Elizabeth said, we have stress with over depression, anxiety, and those are some things that I've been dealing with throughout the pandemic. which was depression. And the aforementioned topics that she was talking about was eating disorders, which I am right now trying to cope over through this pandemic. And I have a amazing therapist that helps me out with this and try and talk me down and go over the diagnosis that he can help me with and the treatments that are provided for him and all the mental health resources that we have here. And I just want to say, honestly, it's been tough, and we have reasonable excuses as college students to, fail and, just feel this pressure, this hopelessness that we have in our body, like this burden that just wants us to, just get through it, And I assure everybody that, this is going to end soon. And I know it is for me and for all of my classmates. This is not over. We're just one step deeper to just a big ball of happiness that's going to be coming up soon. And I really looking forward to what we're going to be talking about today. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And Erica.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Merson. I'm a licensed psychologist. I work at a university counseling center and have worked with university students since 2006. And I also work in a private practice where I also see university students. So the perspective that I would like to offer today is just the perspective of somebody who works very often with university students and has seen what's happened to the university population over the last year plus. I work with students individually. I work with them in group settings. I'm involved in outreach, et cetera, and was involved in a practice both at the university and in my private practice that had to switch from in-person services to immediately all virtual and have been virtual this whole year or a year plus. So thank you for having me. And I look forward to getting the conversation started.
Great, thanks, Erica. Well, let me start by asking a question just to get us going. We've got a few questions I see coming in through the chat. If you could put your questions in the Q&A box, that would just help us know where to look, but we can certainly look through the chat as well. So let me ask the panel, and maybe we could start with you, Erica, and then I think each of you can talk about this. What are some warning signs and symptoms that either you've seen or in fact you've shown that either your parents or friends might see to have a sense that something's not right with kids these days? So could you start with that, Erica?
Sure. So, I want to remind the parents and loved ones of those that are living with their students that you know your loved ones. So you're the best people to identify when you notice changes in their behavior. And those changes can come in a variety of forms. They can come in changes in sleeping behaviors, eating behaviors, engagement with others. So these are the kinds of things that you want to be looking for. When your children, your loved ones are not participating in activities that they generally enjoy participating, when you find themselves kind of retreating, spending a noticeable amount of time by themselves in their room. You might notice also changes in their physical appearance. You might also notice changes in grooming behaviors, right? Maybe they're generally organized. You notice that their room tends to be messy. And also the way that they're speaking and the things that they're speaking about. I've seen students that normally would have a fairly optimistic approach, but now their language is filled with gloomy thoughts and maybe more pessimism and fear words. So these are some of the things I'd be paying attention to, and mainly changes, right? So there'd be students maybe that were struggling before, but really we're looking for changes in the last year or so.
That's really helpful. How about you, Brian? What would you say, how did you change, or what were some signs that you think you may have shown?
Honestly, I agree with what Erica said. My sleeping behavior, the way I was acting, and the way I was speaking and showing my appearance really was the warning signs that my mother was paying attention to, because she noticed before I would have good sleep and I was eating right, and Now she would notice every single day I'm always sleeping. Even throughout the day, like when I'm finished with school, she would see me always in my room sleeping every day. And what she would do is try to make me engage and not sleep a lot and try to sleep on time, because it's really important to be sleeping the right amount of hours that you need for the night, because that just leads to insomnia, that just leads to lack of sleep. And there's two different sides of it with the depression, which is lack of eating, or which is the other way, which is how people use coping mechanisms, which is overeating.
How about
To
you,
show how
Elizabeth? Oh.
sorry,
No,
to
no, go
show
ahead.
how like eating gives them a way of satisfaction,
Mhm.
to make sure like, oh yeah, this is how they satisfy their needs with this. But yeah, it's just really tough. And my mom and I were working through it, and my dad as well, and my therapist, we're working on ways on how this is going to get better. And it's one little step. It's a work in progress.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Elizabeth, do you have anything you want to add in terms of signs or symptoms to look for?
Sure. I definitely think that, yes, obviously noticing changes in mood and overall behavior are going to be a big thing. And I really want to just emphasize, especially when it comes to eating disorders, just from my personal perspective, I started becoming obsessive about specific topics. And this doesn't only apply to eating disorders, it can be applying to something that students can find as their method of a coping mechanism. And so when they start obsessing with video games, and that's the only thing that gives them some sort of satisfaction in life, that is showing that something is not right. Something, life is not providing them joy anymore. They find that they need to obsess about something. And for me, that was food. And my mom would point out to me, you just spent the last 10 minutes talking about food, or, talking about how you need to go exercise, or or obsessing about your appearance, or obsessing about something else. Because a lot of times when students are gloomy and they don't see something to look forward to, they need to latch onto something, and that thing can become something that they become really obsessed with.
Yep, that's helpful. Alicia, do you want to add anything or?
Yeah, I would like to add that all of the things that everyone has said have been really resonating with what I hear a lot on the hotline. There are times when people that share things on chat and on calls tell me, and that is that they don't always show things. They have a face for their family and their friends, but inside they're holding a lot in, and it's exhausting for them. It's something that's a real burden, and they worry about others seeing it. So from the other perspective, as a parent, I think just noticing exhaustion and excuses about the exhaustion, but also isolation, might be something to look for.
Okay, that's helpful. So we have a question from one of our participants. And Erica, maybe you can take this, and then if anyone else wants to add, please do. This participant says, what is the best way to prepare a student who has accommodations and suffers from anxiety to go from homebound virtual learning to college away from home? He doesn't self-advocate and will not go for help, but responds when someone reaches out. Should we reach out proactively to the college?
Absolutely. So I actually do a lot of parent orientations in the summers before the university school year starts. And one of the things that we really encourage the parents to do is to help connect the students to their universities. It might be called something different, but accessibility and disability support services. So for example, if a student has a documented disability for which they need to receive accommodations, we're always encouraging that student to reach out as soon as they can before the school semester starts, so that they could get the accommodations and give that to their professors beforehand. Even if they choose not to use them, at least they have the accommodation registered with the professor, so they have the option to. I would say same thing with the counseling center. So I believe all universities, or most universities, have some sort of support services in the counseling form for their students. We see students we'll see a student for an intake appointment or initial consultation as early as the summer before they start. So certainly, even if you're not reaching out to schedule an intake appointment, certainly reaching out either to the university to find out what's available or to help connect them to a local provider, because a lot of the universities are offering only short-term services, and for a lot of these students, they might benefit from having that kind of support longer term. So having them connect to a local provider. The other thing I want to add is that if a student is seeing somebody for support counseling or for accommodations locally, now if they're going to an in-state school, it's possible that they can continue to see that provider, given that they're in-state. And even now with some of the pandemic changes in terms of the interstate stuff, there are some therapists now that have the ability to see people across lines if they get the registered documentation to be able to do so. So absolutely proactively, and it's okay to help the student do that and then encourage them to do that on their own as well.
Thanks, Erica. Would anyone else like to add anything to that question? Or be good? All right. So the next question is for Brian and Elizabeth, I think, and it's sort of two parts. So this participant asks to the students, how has the recent political climate impacted you and your college peers? And specifically, Elizabeth, I don't think you said you were back in Austin yet, but if you were, has the increase in homelessness in downtown Austin impacted you and your college peers? So this kind of is a question about your environment, and how has the environment, either the political environment or the homelessness environment, impacted you and other college students?
I can start with this question. So just overall, the political climate, to start, I'd like to say that I haven't been in Austin for now almost a year, which is sad, but I'm planning on going back this summer as things start to open up again. So I'm extremely excited about that. But in terms of political climate and how that's impacted us, and also in terms of homelessness, I would say that in Austin particularly, we do have a large homeless population. Unfortunately, a lot of it is due to those with mental illnesses not being able to have the types of services that they need. I unfortunately don't think I can fully speak to that. Just it's not my expertise. However, I can definitely, if this person wants to reach out to me after, I can definitely connect them with somebody with more resources in Austin to answer that question.
Great. How about you, Brian? Do you want to speak to the question about the environment?
Yeah, with the political climate, like Elizabeth said, I haven't been in my campus for a year. And I always ask myself, how am I able to, concentrate and able to get all of my stuff done in order for me to succeed and graduate? So there have been places from last year that have been closing, like libraries, restaurants, all of that stuff. And it's been stressful for many people like myself to, find areas where we can actually concentrate, have the resources that we need, Wi-Fi. For me, now that everything is starting to, smoothly come back into its place, I have been making sure I am outside. I'm either in my backyard or I'm outside of a restaurant in a patio, because sometimes, they don't allow indoor seating, but now they do. I'm trying to keep myself into pace, because the way it works with us students is that when we're at school or when we're in a library, our mindset is more focused on, these assignments and what we're supposed to do. On the other hand, if we're at home, there's lots of stuff going on. I can speak this from myself as well, because I have siblings, and those who don't have any siblings, I can't speak for them, but it's lonely. But for those, it's much more exhilarating, because you're dealing with siblings that don't know what's going on with the pandemic, especially younger ones, and parents that are, dealing with a lot, educating siblings and myself as well. It's a lot to handle, because in this our household that we live in, there are these factors that we focus on at home, which is sleep, television, and food. The fourth could mean a lot of things that are going on at your house personally, but the three main factors of sleep, television, and food all come together because it's really distracting, and you just gotta put yourself into a position where you can actually concentrate. And I know it's really tough for people to, concentrate when there's so much stuff going on in their house, where it's like family drama or any noises from their siblings. And you just, let's say if it was in the nighttime, how can you do it? I mean, mentally, it's not good to be in your room a lot because that just links to a lot of depression. Just for me, I would usually just like go somewhere, not too far, maybe into another household, because I have cousins and aunts that live here in Montgomery County. And just this is one thing I try to tell myself is putting peace in wherever you are, that you are comfortable, that you know is going to be right, that you know that is going to make you succeed, it's going to help you, keep your mind off things and not have any surroundings to distract you from wherever you are. Because that's one of the key factors that we need to focus on is, how are we concentrating on ourselves when there is so much going on with this pandemic from wherever we are. And wherever we are, that's what's most important.
Yeah, that you make a good point, Brian. It's also interesting. Actually, Councilmember Rice points out that you mentioned you have siblings, you have cousins, and certainly for students who have siblings or cousins that they can and other family members that they can lean on, that's really helpful. Maybe Erica or Alicia, you can speak to any advice you might give parents who have only children or just who don't have other siblings in the house or family members who their kids can, connect with.
I actually can speak to that from personal experience because I have a daughter and she's an only child. So she definitely has experienced sort of some of the impact of not having siblings at home. And so one of the things that we did is that we kind of found a pod for her this year so that she was able to connect. And I know that might sound something that is exclusively for young kids. She's only 6.5 or almost 7, but I actually think that concept really can also apply to college students and young adults, that they can form their own pods, right, with other people that also have limited exposure to other people at home. I think that's a fabulous idea. The other thing that I think about for these young students that don't have siblings at home is to find some sort of ritual once a week, for example, having a game night with friends, or having some sort of, even if it's a virtual way of doing it, having some sort of weekly time that they know they're going to see a friend. And now, of course, with the vaccine being available to the younger adults, that's now an opportunity for them to start seeing other people safely, even outside, right, with the weather changing. So I think that obviously having siblings helps. Sometimes it can have its own kind of nuanced negative effects in that capacity when it's just that person that they can interact with. But I like the idea of forming some sort of pod, right? So for grown-ups or for young adults.
Yep, sounds good. Alicia, do you want to add anything to that?
Erica, I really like the idea of a pod. I have never heard that before, so I've learned something. Thank you. Yeah, I think for this age group, peers are so important, and not having anyone in your family, even if it's somebody that you fight with, is really difficult. And not having anybody to compare and contrast with. I think for a lot of people that I interact with on chat who are in this situation and don't have anybody, what I hear is they often find community on online sources, Discord, or I'm not advising this, but this is one way that people can connect with games, with activities online, with social clubs. As it was pointed out, now that we have the vaccine, there's a little bit more opportunity to go outside and just being around other people can be incredibly helpful, even if they're not people that you know, just being around them, safely social distance maybe at this point. And then just trying to get out and get some kind of activity in, whether it be with others in a sport or just walking around and being in a community.
Yep, that's great. Yeah, my 22-year-old has formed a pod, so I totally have seen a huge benefit for him in doing that. So here's a question we have. My son has terrible anxiety and I'm desperate to find him a therapist, but none has room for new clients and no one takes our insurance, so we feel stuck. Any suggestions for how to find a therapist? Maybe Erica, this is something you can help with?
Yeah, I mean, as a practitioner, we are actually overwhelmed with requests for counseling. So I'm so sorry for those of you who are struggling with that. What I would say is when you're reaching out for services from somebody and they say that they're not able to provide that, to ask that provider for a referral from that person. So when someone contacts me and asks to see if I have openings and I don't, I will almost always, if not always, give them another name within my community that I know, that I've consulted with, that I know that they have openings. So I'm not leaving that person empty-handed, but I'm providing them with another direction. And I highly encourage parents who are seeking services for their kid to use that. The other thing too is to contact the local universities or the local organizations that help, because oftentimes they are in constant communication with local providers. So their referral list is usually up to date. So they're not providing names of providers that hopefully are had openings 3 months ago, but they haven't checked with. So those are two pieces of advice that I would offer.
Great. We have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to go through some of these, and panelists, just feel free to jump in if I keep going and you want to add something. So this next question, I think it'd be interesting to hear Brian or Elizabeth start by sharing your perspective on this, and then Erica or Alicia jump in if you'd like to. So this question is, our 17-year-old son is a junior in high school who is showing signs or symptoms of the issues that we're discussing. He's in a critical time academically due to college testing and applications, yet he shows no interest at all or initiative. We don't feel like we can push him, but we also feel like we can't just leave it to him. So what do you recommend? Any thoughts, Brian or Elizabeth?
I definitely know I'm sure Brian also definitely knows what it's like to go through your junior year of high school. It's one of probably the worst times in my entire schooling career. It's incredibly, there's so much anxiety and so much unknown that it's definitely expected that your son would have at least some kind of anxiety or potentially depression around this. Now, in regards to the idea of being able to push him or not, I think there's always a point at which you need to offer services, but not make it as if you are pushing something onto your son. So he is 17, and there's a point at which you have to kind of let him make his own decisions. And a lot of times, when you try and suggest something, it can come off, as a parent, you're coming from a place of compassion, but it can come off as pushy or come off as you're accusing him of doing something, or, you're not showing any initiative. You don't want to do anything. Instead, what I would suggest, and I just found this to be incredibly successful with me, is that as a parent, always make it clear that he has access to resources. That, if you ever want to go to therapy, if you ever need to see a doctor, if you ever feel like you need to talk to me, then I am here for you, because I know what it's like. It's a really stinky time to be alive and with this pandemic, but don't pry too much, because ultimately he is the one who needs to have the initiative and the interest to get mental health services, because you can try and force someone to do something, but it's ultimately not going to be successful as if he comes to the conclusion himself that he needs help.
Elizabeth, you can come and teach classes in our PEP, at our parenting programs. That's exactly what we would have recommended. Brian, do you want to add any perspective as well on just what it feels like? If you have the sense of what it feels like sometimes to be pushed and versus supported, and the balance there.
Yeah, I agree with what everything Elizabeth said with junior, because that is the most stressful years that I've dealt with back when I was in high school. That's a lot of pressure as a student because you have a lot of college applications just looking at you, making sure you do the right thing, getting the good grades that you need, you know. But in this case, like Elizabeth said, like you don't want to push too much of your child to the point where there are expectations. And those are things that families expect from their kids is to, graduate from high school, get a good degree, and, make sure you go to one of the best schools in the state or in the country. But, this focus is made on them, not on the school, not on a certain GPA. It's about them and what they want to do for their future. Who knows, maybe they don't want to go to college. They want to do something else that they're very passionate about. And you have to understand that no matter what they decide, you have to be there for them and you got to appreciate it for them. As long as they're happy, you should be happy as well. And for him, dealing with academically, showing no interest at all, literally that's what I was dealing with while I was at MC. Deciding, should I even graduate because I'm falling behind with the lack of, homework assignments that I've been behind, failing classes too, It's normal for us as students, and it's not something that, that should be labeled as, oh yeah, he's gonna fail because, he has bad grades. No other student that has a certain GPA, they're gonna determine who they are. And that's one thing that I've been realizing from standardized testings, such as the SATs and the ACTs, is that they're not going to determine who we are and what we're going to decide in the future. It's what we do. We're not going to let just the stupid tests decide who we are. No, absolutely not.
Yeah, well said. All right. Next question is, do all colleges have robust counseling services available to students? And can a parent refer if they see the need for their child when the student themselves don't want to self-refer? So I'm not sure who might be able to answer that question. Erica? Yeah, go ahead.
Can't speak for all universities, but I can say that mental health in the college population is a huge, growing topic of concern. So I feel confidently saying that if not all, almost all have some. When you say robust, that's where I think that's a hard question to answer, because I think from my involvement in university college counseling centers nationwide, we are finding that we are very understaffed and under-resourced and not able to adequately meet the demands of college students. So what I would say is definitely find out what's available for your college that your student is thinking about attending. Again, that information is always online, and you get a sense of what is offered and what the processes and procedures are. I would also say that it might depend on the specific university, but one thing that as part of my role at the university where I work, is that we do offer a parent warm line where parents can call when they're seeking specific questions or they have concerns, and they can consult with a member of our staff to get some recommendations about what they as a parent can do to support their student. So I imagine that most universities will offer something similar. And generally speaking, again, this would probably depend based on the university, but we discourage parents from setting up the appointment for the student because oftentimes those students don't show up, but we highly encourage the parent maybe to either bring them over when we were in person or to call with their child to set up the appointment. But we just find that when the student makes the appointment themselves, him, her, themselves, they're more likely to attend.
Yeah. All right, the next question is about eating disorders, and Elizabeth, you talked about this, so maybe you can take the first stab at it. So the question is, eating disorders were mentioned as something a few students are experiencing. Please discuss what this looks like for males versus females. And thank you for hosting this. So Elizabeth, maybe you can start, and Brian, maybe you can join, you can add as well.
So this is a really great question, and I think it's really important to note that it is something that affects both men and women and those who identify as non-binary in many different ways, because we all have issues with body image. And I think that I would like to approach this just in terms of warning signs that people can look out for, because it does affect everybody in different ways. And so I can't speak to anybody's experience but my own. But in terms of what I was experiencing was, I have a history of depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress from trauma that I had as a child. And so I have a history of depression. And because of that, a lot of times I'm looking for coping mechanisms. And the pandemic has been something that a lot of people have been looking for some kind of coping mechanism. And so one of those things is food. And so like Brian had said before, some people are overeating, some people are undereating. It's just a way to make yourself feel normal. And so the most obvious signs of an eating disorder that parents will easily be able to identify is obviously weight fluctuations, severe weight gain, severe weight loss. But there is something to be said about atypical eating disorders, and that it's not always going to be obvious. You can see people starting to develop obsessions with food, obsessions with exercise. And so I would definitely say that if you start seeing changes in the way that your child is, enjoying life, and maybe they're turning to food or baking and not eating any of it, or obsessing over menus when you're going out to eat, or specifically choosing not to eat certain food groups. A lot of these things we don't necessarily associate with eating disorders because we think of, people who are skin and bones anorexic. But there are lots of different types of eating disorders, and anything where an unhealthy relationship with food has developed is an eating disorder and should be acknowledged. And so that can happen in both men and women and those who identify as non-binary as a coping mechanism, because whether that be to try and solve depression or to try and cope with their depression, but it can show up in many different ways. And so that's just my personal experience with eating disorders.
Mm-hmm. Brian, I can't remember if you said you have seen folks with eating disorder, if you ever have had any issues with eating disorder?
Yes, I have. So with this pandemic, I have been on a huge case of eating disorders, and most of it was with all these type of food groups, but the one that was really more significant was carbs. And carbs, what it does is produces into sugar, and what that sugar does into your body it's just really unhealthy. For me, once the pandemic started, I ended up buying so much food, junk food, snacks, chips, which is something that most of us eat, us college students, to either, concentrate on our homework or to just make us satisfied from the depression that we deal with, whether it's, a hard breakup or just struggles at home or just school. But I can assure you that I wasn't like this before the pandemic, because I used to weigh 145. I now weigh 167.3 as I'm standing right now. And it has affected me a lot as a male, because when you're on social media, it causes a really huge impact with seeing the different images between, male and female, and how a certain body that you have to be, and how people expect you to look like, because everybody comes with different shapes and sizes, whether you're skinny, whether you're, just fat or whatever. But it's really something that really needs to be brought up. And I feel that some are not even talking about it because, like Elizabeth was saying, there are some things that you don't even notice, like when it comes to seeing your kids eat, like, and have a big obsession with it. It's really critical to, talk about it because I have a cousin and she has been diagnosed with diabetes, and just looking at her every day, it's just really tough for me. That makes me want to help her a lot, which is with a little exercising. And one thing about us kids and us college students is that we are young. We don't deserve too much of this to be dealing with all this stress and trauma. We really want to take good care of ourselves. And that's one major key that we need to focus on. No matter what you look like, we just have to be taking good care of ourselves and getting involved and, talking to people that we feel comfortable with. Because if we're not talking about these issues with people, then how are we going to be, take good care of ourselves and make ourselves more healthy in the future? Like Erica was saying, we put ourselves into a mask to make sure that none of our friends and families know what we're dealing with. We can have an image with our friends or whatever's at work and at home, but too much of that just really carries a big burden with all of us. And that's something that we really need to fix.
Yeah, I see that we've put a link to the National Eating Disorder Hotline or Help Support Line in the chat. As a parent, I'm sitting here thinking, if we suspect or outright see our kids suffering from eating disorder or too much eating or not enough eating, Erica or Alicia, what would you advise parents to do? I mean, I've got two very, a 22 and a 20-year-old boy, and I know they don't like for me to get involved and tell them a lot. So it's really tricky, I feel like, as a parent to know the right amount to say without pushing or going too far and then turning them off. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I think with eating disorders, there's a certain protective factor that's involved, and to recognize the kind of ambiguity in that can be helpful to getting into your child if you suspect that they might have that. And it's a way to kind of open up the conversation because a lot of it kind of thrives in secrecy. So I think just to open it up and to talk about maybe from an I statement, I'm concerned about you, and to recognize that it's something that is not necessarily something that your child might see as a bad thing. It's as Elizabeth said, and as Brian said, it's a coping mechanism. So it's useful in that sense. And as a parent, I think to just kind of go in there with this element of respect or knowledge is a good start.
Yeah, that's good advice. Here's another question. What
Right.
do you, oh,
Do you
go
mind
ahead,
if I
please.
also comment on that really quick?
Yeah, please.
I think that it's incredibly important to highlight the fact that our society is incredibly fat phobic. And so while you might see your child's weight loss as something that is good, it is not necessarily a good thing. And so and I definitely resonate with the idea of eating disorders living in secrecy. And I think the number one mistake that a parent can make, and it doesn't seem like it because you're coming again from this place of compassion, is attacking your child and accusing them of having some kind of eating disorder. And and I say attacking not because that's not necessarily what you're doing, but that's how it feels. When you have something that finally makes you feel okay for a second, or something that you're able to latch onto, and somebody says, that's wrong, it's basically like you're coming for everything that is good in the world. And eating disorders are incredibly loud and incredibly awful. And they just tell you basically the only way that you can be happy one day is, in my case, is restricting as much as I can. And then for other people, it's binging. For other people, it's purging. And so I think the number one thing that you can do, and I said, as I touched on this before, is make sure your child knows that there are resources, and when they are ready, it is time that they are able to go and see a therapist. Because the second you say to them, I think you have an eating disorder, they're going to retreat more, and they're going to become more secretive than they already are. So it's incredibly important also to stop any kind of language around food that is negative. Food, exercise, oh, I shouldn't eat that, it's too greasy. Oh, I shouldn't do this. That's not going to help in the long run. It's something that's ingrained in our society that, we should treat food as if it's bad. We should treat exercise as if it's this great, great thing. And while obviously food and exercise are good, everything in moderation is really the key. And so limiting negative talk around food, limiting negative talk against yourself, is really the greatest thing that you can do in trying to combat somebody's eating disorder.
Those are really good points. Thanks, Elizabeth. So here's a question that I think is somewhat related, and it's related from the sense of, it's parents trying to figure out what to do. How can we be supportive in this, really these difficult situations for our kids? So the question is, what do you suggest a parent do if they notice their student is suffering from anxiety or depression while living away from home with online classes? How can you convince them to seek help and find help in their school community? And I know as a parent, that's probably one of the toughest things. You're not there, you're far away, you sense your child's depressed, you don't know what to do, how to support them. Maybe Erica, you want to start, and then maybe Brian or Elizabeth, you can jump in, and Alicia too, because this is a tough one, I know.
Sure. The sense of powerlessness and helplessness that you're describing is palpable. And I want to remind all the parents out there that you've been here before, right? Remember when your kid took their first steps and they were stumbling and you thought they were going to hit their head on the side of that piece of furniture that you forgot to childproof? Like, you've been here before and you'll be here again. And I say that because the best thing that you can do is provide. I think, Elizabeth, I love what you said before about parents providing the environment so that when the child falls, they're not falling into the hard surface alone. So I would say, again, familiarizing yourselves with the local resources so that you can help offer them some suggestions. I think if you have any relationship with their friends, like kind of making sure that they know that you can you're there for anything that the student might need, and that you can enlist their local support system. I also think, similar to the eating disorder response, I also think focusing on the specific identifiable things that you're noticing, right? Sweetie, I know that academics, were something that made you feel really good. And I noticed that you aren't as excited about your classes, or I noticed that, you used to talk about your friends and now you're not talking to them anymore. Like, I just want you to know that I'm here if you need anything. I think the best thing that you could do as parents is provide sort of the support, but also let them have to figure it out a little bit, which I know is so hard, but to catch them, right? And to sort of be able to lean them back up and then be there again when they fall. But really recognizing that they're adults now, and part of what we want for them is to succeed, and we want to help them as best we can. But part of helping them sometimes is letting them fall a little bit and learning what they can do to get themselves back up, knowing that you're there to help them.
Thanks, Erica. Brian or Elizabeth, do you have anything you want to add from the student's point of view? Yeah, we covered it. Okay, great. We're coming close to the hour, so I'm going to take a couple more questions, and then I may ask each of our panelists to provide any wrap-up thoughts. So here's an interesting question. What are some ways for youth to re-socialize, to get back those skills that they have not been practicing in over a year? Any thoughts on that? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
I would say be patient, right? Like the same way that we ourselves as grownups have to learn some of those skills again. to be patient, and help your students be patient with themselves too. I think it's going to come back more naturally than we think it is. I would also say, encouraging them to start transitioning some of the online activities or the virtual activities that they're doing to see when feels safe and appropriate, to encourage them to take advantage of some of the in-person options. So whether that's, things that the school is offering, whether that's the new school that they're going to, again, obviously safety first, but to sort of gradually start to incorporate activities, particularly with people with whom your students or your children feel the most comfortably, right? So starting with very small groups, maybe one-on-one, and then encouraging them to branch out a little bit. But please have patience, the same way that, again, we need patience for ourselves. Like, we also have been closed off a little bit. So, and model that for them too, normalize the challenges.
Mhm. So this will be our last question, and this one is for you, Erica, but I think maybe you can add a few thoughts, and then if any of you want to jump in. The question is, any strategies for dealing with the social injustice issues that seem to plague the news? Such news stories weigh heavily on young people, particularly minorities.
I think that's a very appropriate question for our time. I think for many of our students, what we want to encourage them also to set some boundaries around the news, right? So it's important to be informed. It's also important to recognize when the constant exposure is becoming detrimental to our mental health. So allowing ourselves to take, for example, social media or news breaks, I think is very important. I'm also aware that a lot of universities are hosting some in person now, but a lot of virtual spaces, whether they're town halls, whether they're community discussions for relevant issues, whether it's about the anti-Asian violence, the Black Lives Matter. That's not a good slip up. I just had my apologies on that one. But thinking about how there are places that students can start to connect with other students that share similar values and passions about that, thinking about ways that you want to involve yourself as well. And again, safe but community activism, but really kind of paying attention to when it's too much and when you feel like you've got some energy to lean back into it.
Great. I'm going to ask each panelist to give some final thoughts. And if you want to address that last question, feel free to do so as well. But if each of you can just maybe say one thing you'd like a parent to take away from tonight as they go back out and reach out to their young adult, what would you advise or suggest? So why don't I start, Brian, with you?
Honestly, if I were a parent, I would just go right up to my child, give him a really big hug, and just look him in the eyes, have that good eye contact to know that you are there for them. And no matter what you are, no matter sexuality, race, religious beliefs, the way you look, anything, no matter what happens, they are your child and you need to respect them and love them for who they are. This is coming from a gay person that's part of the LGBT plus community that, even though I am who I am, luckily I have parents to, love me for who I am. And that's our responsibility as parents to, not put our kids and view them as the bad guy and, put them as more of a positive person that is, that's going to do really good things in the future, because if we literally just give them a lot of expectations and all these rules that, that's not going to satisfy them, you're leaning them away towards from what they actually want to do in the future. And from what Erica and Elizabeth was saying, really try not to pressure themselves much, once they're out of the nest, you gotta have them, let them make their own decisions in the future. And you gotta be that source no matter if they're wrong, no matter if you're right or wrong, you have to be there. There's no right or wrong for these answers in family, because family lasts forever, and that's something that they have to remind themselves.
Thanks, Brian. Elizabeth?
I would just say that this is a panel about 18 to 24-year-olds. We're working with adults, and as much as you want to, just completely take over and try and help your child as much as possible because, it's an unknown time, they are an adult. And you need to work together as adults. And like Erica said, there are points at which it's really important to let them fall a little bit before so that they can pick themselves back up.
Good point. Thanks, Elizabeth. Alicia?
Yeah, I really like the points that Brian and Elizabeth both gave about hugs and treating others as an adult. The only thing I would add maybe would be to just be open and to just listen. It doesn't have to be a monumental change, I would suggest, but just small things, asking how a day was if you're in contact, keeping these communication channels open, I think is incredibly important and valuable, and just have the goal of every conversation to have another conversation. Keep it going.
Keep it going. Yeah. And Erica, you want to have the last word?
I mean, I loved everything that the three of my fellow panelists just said. I could not agree with it more. I would say the only things I would add would be the patience component is really important. I think this impacted all of us, and we had no prep time. And now, similarly to a trauma response where things that felt very safe all of a sudden became unsafe immediately. And now we're all having to rebuild. So remember that as parents and loved ones, you can model, right, what the transition back can be like. So what you do, children always see it, right? When they see you taking care of your body, when they see you taking care of your mind, they see that even when they're young adults and you don't think that they see it, right? So keep taking care of yourselves, be patient with yourself, be patient with them, and right. And as long as they know that you're there for them, they're going to be okay.
Great advice. Great way to wrap up the discussion tonight. Thank you all so much, Brian, Erica, Elizabeth, Alicia. This was fantastic. I know I learned a lot. I appreciate everything you guys all have said. And I appreciate EveryMind for hosting this evening. This was just a great, I think, opportunity for all of us with young adults to just hear from some great experts and great wisdom in the room. Thank you, Councilmember Craig Rice, for joining us and for setting the stage and the tone. And I would just say in wrap up, make sure you look through some of those resources that are in the chat box. I would also like to say that tomorrow night, the Parent Encouragement Program is going to host a similar program for parents of children with tweens and teens. So we're going to be talking about how you can support the mental health of your teen and tween. And there's a link that should be coming through in the chat now in a few seconds that you can click on, or you can visit pepparent.org and click on online programs and find out how you can register for our free webinar tomorrow night. So again, thanks to everyone, and we'll just take your advice and put it to good use now. Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.